Hi, I'm Kevin Kemp, and this is Kemp Outside. We're your inside source for all things outside. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button for more videos on camping and fishing related content. Everything from gear reviews, campsite reviews, tips and tricks, gear maintenance, uh, all kinds of different content from fishing and camping and hiking, uh, love and nature, fish and wildlife conservation, all kinds of different videos will be coming to you soon. We're going to continue our Learn to Fish series. It's a series that's all about teaching people how to fish who don't have much experience. So today we're going to talk about the different types of fishing line. So stay tuned. Okay, so this is the next video in our series on learning to fish. And again, this is for you moms and dads out there who maybe have never fished before and want to take your kid fishing. Or it's for people that just, maybe they've only fished a couple times, but they don't know what they need. They want to invest in their own gear for the first time. This video series is for you. So today we're going to talk about the different types of fishing line. And there's three different types primarily that anglers use. The first one is called monofilament line. So here's a spool of monofilament. This is Berkley Trilene. I use a lot of Berkley Trilene fishing line. I use a lot of Berkley products, in fact. I'm not sponsored by them, so this is totally independent recommendation, but it is something that I use. So monofilament, I don't know, yeah, you can see that. So monofilament is made out of, I think it's made out of nylon. And it's the most common fishing line. It's been around probably the longest. And it's by far the cheapest kind of fishing line that you can use. I use a lot of monofilament, although I do use the two other types of fishing line, Fluorocarbon and Braid, that we'll talk about in a little bit. I use monofilament a lot. And this is what I use it for. So primarily, when I have guests on my boat or kids on my boat, or I'm taking somebody fishing who's a beginner, oftentimes the rods that they're using has monofilament line on it. There's a number of reasons for that. Number one is that, again, monofilament is expensive. So if they get hung up or get hung up in a tree or something like that, and I have to lose a lot of line, I'm not out a lot of money if I have to lose a lot of line or something gets broken off. Another reason is that it is relatively stretchy compared to other lines, which means it acts as a halfway decent shock absorber. So if you have, if you're fishing for fish that hit really hard, things like Spanish mackerel or grouper or those kinds of things, any of your fast swimming fish like king mackerel, which are saltwater species, but even largemouth bass can hit pretty hard. The nice thing about monofilament is it does stretch a little bit, and so it is less likely to break on a quick strike. Monofilament is pretty decent at abrasion resistance. So when a fish is swimming around and it's hooked and it goes to swim underneath that rock or around that branch to try and get away, as the line rubs up against that branch or that rock, it's pretty good at abrasion resistance. The thicker the line, the better the abrasion resistance typically. This trilene that I use, the blue label, is called Extra Tough, and it's supposed to be more abrasion resistant than the red label trilene. The red label trilene advertises smoother casts. Honestly, I really don't notice the difference. Really, the only way to test it would be to create some kind of, trial condition where you test the two lines side by side. If you follow Salt Strong at all, give a shout out to those guys. They do a lot of abrasion resistance testing for different lines. So if you're interested in a specific brand of line, check out their abrasion resistance videos. They're really cool. I've spent hours watching those videos because I'm probably more of a fishing nerd than most people. But like I said, I like monofilament for a lot of reasons. When I'm going after big fish, I use monofilament either as my main line or as a shock leader. So if I'm fishing with braid, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but if I'm fishing with braid, I'll either have a leader of fluorocarbon or monofilament. One, because braid is very visible so the fish see it, but the other reason is because braid doesn't stretch at all, and so if I want a little bit of a shock absorber in the line, I will use monofilament especially as a shock leader. So monofilament, even if you go to the more advanced, more expensive lines like fluorocarbon and braid, there's definitely use for monofilament in your tackle box. If you're just starting out, tying knots with monofilament is relatively easy. It's easy to spool onto your rod. It's relatively forgiving. So I recommend monofilament. If you're a more advanced angler, one of the benefits of monofilament line is that it floats on top of the water. So if you're fishing with lures that we call top waters, which are lures that work across the top of the water, a floating line will help you work that lure better than a line that sinks. And fluorocarbon and braid both sink. So if you're fishing topwater lures, you may want to consider using monofilament line. A lot of anglers set up specific rods for specific things, and so if you have a specific rod that's set up for topwater use, you may have monofilament on it instead of braid or fluorocarbon. Like I said, monofilament is the cheapest line out there. It's great for beginners, but there are other options. So the next line I want to talk about is fluorocarbon. And so I use Berkeley's fluorocarbon, so it's trilene fluorocarbon compared to their trilene monofilament. So it looks a little different. I don't know if they have any other colors besides the gold, but you have to definitely check to make sure that you're buying fluorocarbon instead of monofilament. Now, fluorocarbon looks a lot like monofilament. So I'm going to hold it up, and so hopefully looks like you can see it there in the video. So fluorocarbon, I guess the best way to say it is supposed to absorb light. So it makes it more difficult to see underwater than monofilament. You know, I've been in like swimming pools with both lines, and I can see both lines with my eyes, and I'm assuming that fish can see both lines too. I don't know whether that's really an advantage or not. A lot of line companies claim that it is. A lot of anglers claim that it is, but I don't know if that's really myth or true. What I like about fluorocarbon is it typically is very abrasion resistant, even more abrasion resistant than mono. Not always. Again, check the Salt Strong videos because their tests were pretty eye-opening. But I like fluorocarbon, especially for leader material. It's more expensive than monofilament, so stringing my whole rod with fluorocarbon instead of monofilament is not something that I typically do. There is one instance where I do string my rod with fluorocarbon, full fluorocarbon line, and that is for a bass fishing technique called drop shotting. And so I have a special fishing rod that I use just for drop shot. And I'll go over drop shotting in the future, but basically what it is it's what's called a finesse technique, which is basically where it's when fish are really finicky and it's really hard to get them to bite. This is a technique to help get them to bite. And so you want everything to be really small and really perfect where they can't see anything, where if they see a big hook or they see the line in the water, they're not going to strike. And so when you want all your conditions to be perfect, fluorocarbon can be a good way to go. Fluorocarbon is the leader material of choice for saltwater anglers who use braid as their main line. So what a leader is a length of line between the main line and the hook. And you can use a leader for a variety of reasons. So one reason is because your main line is a smaller pound test than your leader material, maybe you want your leader material to be able to handle abrasion better, or you want it to be a stronger material so that it's less prone to be bitten through. A lot of fish have sharp teeth, especially saltwater fish. Most of our saltwater fish are fish that you don't want to stick your hand in their mouth. And so anglers will use a stronger leader to combat against cuts and abrasions that way. Leader can also be, it doesn't have to just be fluorocarbon or monofilament. In a lot of saltwater situations, and then also for pike and muskie, when I pike and muskie fish, I'll use even metal leaders, steel, either piano wire or different types of metal leaders to protect from being bitten through. And that works great for mackerel, your Spanish mackerel and king mackerel species. But anyway, so fluorocarbon, it sinks in water. It doesn't float like the monofilament does. So if you are working swim baits or other lures and you want them to dive deeper, using a line that sinks helps your lures get deeper than monofilament does. And then, like I said, it makes a great leader material to tie between your main line and your hook for abrasion resistance, and so that your fish don't see it. Monofilament does not stretch as much as, fluorocarbon does not stretch as much as monofilament. So if you want a shock leader, you definitely want to use that mono instead of fluoro. When I'm reef fishing, my primary line is braid. And I bounce back and forth between fluorocarbon and monofilament leaders. I find both to work pretty well. I don't know that one performs better than the other. So if you're on a budget and you want to save as much money as possible, if you were choosing between fluorocarbon and monofilament, I would definitely go with monofilament. One thing I did forget to mention is fluorocarbon always comes in that clear color. Actually, I take that back. There are some companies now that are producing fluorocarbon in a pink type color, and that's because the idea is that the color red is the first color to filter out when light travels through water, so you can see it above the water, but you can't see it below the water. So there is some pink monofilament out there, but most of it, what you're going to see is clear. Fluorocarbon. Most of the fluorocarbon you're going to see is clear. For monofilament comes in a whole variety of colors. This one is a green color. You see them in clear. Some lines are red for the same reason as there's pink fluorocarbon. Some come in high-vis yellow. That's kind of, people often think that, why would you want your line high-vis yellow? That is really good when you are trolling. So if you're in a boat and you're trolling baits behind your boat, using high-vis yellow line allows you to see your line as it trails away from your boat into the water. So I really like yellow, high-vis yellow line if I'm trolling, and so that's a color that's available both in monofilament and braid. So the last line type that we're going to talk about is braid. So this is Power Pro. Power Pro is owned by Shimano. At least they were. I think they still are. And Power Pro or braided line is really, really interesting in that the amount of the strength that it has. So how many pound test it is, let's say, is very high compared to diameter of the line. So I don't even know if you can see this. Here, I'm going to hold it up really close. Yeah, I think you can see it compared to my face. But this is 15-pound test line. And so for braid, 15-pound test line is the same diameter as 4-pound test monofilament. So you can get a whole lot more braid on a reel than you can monofilament or fluorocarbon because the diameter is so much stronger. Braid, I'm going to get this right. Braid sinks in water just like fluorocarbon does. Monofilament floats, if you remember. So that helps. Also, if you're trolling baits or you have deep diving baits and you want them to go deep, braid is an excellent choice because because of the resistance of the water as you're pulling the bait through the water. The braid cuts through the water because it's narrower, so it allows the baits to dive deeper than other lines. Braid has no stretch. So if you want a fishing line that offers some shock resistance, some stretch to it, braid is not the line to go to. For a lot of anglers that are out there trolling for really large fish in the ocean, whether it's the Atlantic or the Gulf or probably the Pacific, whatever, they may use very strong braided main line and then use a shock leader of either probably monofilament that can even be 30, 40, 50 yards of leader material between their main line and their hook or their bait. If you need any shock at all, braid is not a very suitable line. What braid is good for, though, is casting long distances. There's less resistance as the line goes through the guides of the rod as you cast it. So you're going to send your lure farther with braided line. It has no memory. So if you've ever been fishing and you cast out, and before you reel in, your line, the monofilament line, sits on the surface of the water, and it's kind of got these curls in it. That's because monofilament line and fluorocarbon line has memory, so it remembers that it was wound around a spool. Braid has no memory, or very little memory anyway, I should say, and so it doesn't have those coils in it, so that can be beneficial. It's very resistant to UV light and to water and to that kind of thing. Not a lot weakens braid. The only thing that really weakens braid over time is abrasion, where monofilament is susceptible to UV. So the more you use monofilament line, the weaker it's going to get, either because it absorbs water. Fluorocarbon and braid don't absorb water. Monofilament does. So monofilament can break down either by water absorption over time or exposure to UV light over time. Braid does not degrade due to UV. So really the only time you have to replace your line is due to abrasion. If it's looking kind of ratty, you definitely want to replace it. Braid is very sharp. As a matter of fact, it cuts like a knife. You don't want to wrap it around a finger or your hand or something like that and yank really hard, because it will cut right into you. As a result, the guides for fishing rods have changed, and they have started to be made out of even harder materials, ceramic rings and metal rings and those kind of things. Because if you have an old fishing rod and you put braid on it, there's a chance that the braid is going to cut right through the rings of the line guides on your rod. So that might be something you want to consider, is if you have an old fishing rod that you're fishing with, you may not want to fish with braid. Pretty much any rod that's been made in the last 10 years now, it's probably not the case anymore, but it is something to consider. Braid is very, very strong, and like I said in a previous video, bass fishermen will load their bait casters up with 65-pound test braided line to be able to cut through really heavy-duty vegetation to go after those large bass. So you could never put 65-pound test monofilament on a small fishing reel, but you can put 65-pound test braid. So I use braid, and I use braid because I've gotten used to fishing with it. I like the casting distance. I like the sensitivity of braid. I seem to feel more strikes with braid than I do monofilament or fluorocarbon. But it does take some getting used to. You need to make sure that it's wound tightly around the spool of your reel, and you need to if it isn't. So what happens when it isn't is when you go to cast and the line starts to come off the reel, if it isn't wound tightly and comes off the reel evenly, you'll get what's called a wind knot, where basically the line will tie itself in a knot in the air, which can be really frustrating because knots weaken the line. So, and it doesn't flow through the guides as well. So if you have a wind knot, you need to stop, you need to cut it out, you need to retie. that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that if you're fishing with braid, that you kind of maybe pay attention, maybe pay a little more attention to your line than you would maybe if it was monofilament. All in all, though, I do like the casting distance and the sensitivity of braid. I like the way when I'm trolling lures and things like that, I get the depth I want. If you're a more advanced angler, you're going to want to use monofilament. I would say, or if you're a more advanced angler, you're going to want to use braid as your main line probably most of the time. Very few applications have you tie braid directly to your terminal tackle, so your hook or your lure. If you're punching through heavy vegetation or looking for a reaction strike from a fish, typically in bass fishing, you may tie braid directly to the hook. But in a lot of other fishing, because braid is not clear, it's easily seen in water, even though it's really narrow. It's either green in color. Some of the colors are like vermilion red or high vis yellow or moss green like this one. I've seen some braids. Berkeley has a new braid out that's white. Because they're high vis, you don't want to use those as the line all the way to your hook. You want to use some kind of leader material. So I tie a uni to uni knot to tie my braided line onto either my monofilament or fluorocarbon leader, and that's a knot I'm going to show you in a future video. So if you want to learn how to tie leaders to main line without using a swivel or something like that, the uni to uni knot is the knot to use. So we'll show you that in a future video, like I said. But I highly recommend starting off with monofilament. If you're a brand new angler, start off with monofilament, kind of learn the ropes there, learn your knots. It's an easy line to use. It's very forgiving. And then as you work your way up, or you want more casting distance, or you're ready to try something new, then go ahead and either give braid or fluorocarbon a shot. I recommend going to braid over fluorocarbon for the most part, just because if you're going to spend that much on the extra line, you might as well get the performance of braid, and then invest in some fluorocarbon maybe for some leader material or something like that. So that's really kind of the overview of monofilament versus fluorocarbon versus braid. Like I said, if you're an angler on a budget and you're just starting out and you're buying a fishing rod and a reel and line and hooks and sinkers and lures and all that stuff, just save some money online. Go ahead and get some monofilament to start out. If you are a little more experienced, or you've got a little bit of a bigger budget or whatever, I'd recommend learning braid, learning how to use braid. One of the advantages of braid is because it doesn't break down due to water or UV. Very rarely do I ever replace the braid on my rods and reels. On monofilament, they suggest that you change it every season. I think I let mine go a little longer than that, but I live in Florida, so there is really no off season. Some anglers change their braid or their line out, every winter, but I fish all winter long, so I more just change my line when I think it's starting to go bad. I've had braid on reels for 10 years or more because it's just a really solid fishing line, where I definitely don't let my monofilament go that long. So, but at the same time, you can buy a whole lot of monofilament for the price of braid. So either way, I think you probably break even. Like I said, if you're just starting out and you want to go with a line that's a little more forgiving and a little cheaper at the store, go with monofilament. If you want to try something a little more advanced with better casting distance and some better sensitivity and performance, go with braid. And then by all means, try fluorocarbon for those either finesse fishing setups like drop shotting, or as leader material for either fishing with braid, or even sometimes fishing with monofilament. If you want a really clear leader, you can tie from mono to fluoro. So with that, if you have any questions on what line to get, or what you're going after with your specific fishing situation, definitely drop that in the comments. I'd be happy to answer the questions, or you can email me. at info@kempoutside.com. We're here to help you. As I said in these other Learning to Fish videos, the whole goal here is for you to have a successful outing with your family on your first fishing trip, or your second fishing trip if your first one didn't go so well. Really want you to have a good time with your family and have success and to catch fish and all those things. So, by all means, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments or shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer them in a future video or just via email if it's short and quick. And for you advanced anglers out there that are watching or checking us out, if you have any tips or tricks that you want to share with fellow outsiders, drop those in the comments. Definitely also hit that subscribe button if this was helpful to you. We're going to be bringing you a whole lot more. We're gonna do a video series next on terminal tackle. So what kind of hooks you should use, what kind of weights, sinkers. We're going to look at bobbers, and floats and the different types of things there. We're going to look at all the different types of lures there are, and what their application is. How to fish with live bait, when to use worms, when to use crickets, when to use, for saltwater shrimp or any of the various bait fish that we use, how to hook them, how to use them, that kind of thing. And we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff. So when this whole Learn to Fish series is over, hopefully you will be able to go fishing anywhere you live, whether that's near rivers or streams or lakes or the pond in your backyard or the fishing pier on the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Coast, or the Pacific Coast. Whatever it is, we're hoping that by the time we're done with this series, you're going to be ready to fish. By all means, share your success stories. If you found this video useful and you went out and you tried it and you caught your first fish or your kid caught their first fish, we'd love to give you a shout out on social media. We'll post you on our Facebook page or our Instagram or our Twitter with a big old shout out and congratulations and all that stuff. Like I've said before, the pictures of my kids holding their first fish are some of my favorite pictures as a dad. So, go ahead and share those with me too. We want to celebrate your success. So with that, we'll see you next time on Kemp Outside. Go out there, get fishing, have a great time, and let me know how it's going. We'll see you next time.